the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission Board meeting for October 8th, 2019. I think we'll start with going around the room and introducing ourselves. I'm Lauren Eubanks, Chair of the Regional Planning.
Waninger, staff.
Don LaHaye, Waitsfield. Bob Warnick, Rollins.
Lee Catania,
Jerry D'Amico, Roxburgh.
Ron Krause, Middlesex.
Bill Frasier, Montpelier City Manager, guest.
Jack Pauley, East Montpelier, alternate.
Marcella Dent, Montpelier.
Brent Tobin, Plainfield.
Paula Emery, Plainfield, alternate.
Julie Potter, East Montpelier. Amy Hornblast, Cabot.
Bill Aaron, Worcester.
Peter Kirby, Washington, and Viking Bush, Duxbury.
Ashley Jones, staff.
Seawald Speech Warrior, and the Vice Chair.
Robin Shaw, Marshfield.
Thank you. And welcome our newest commissioner from Montpelier, Marcella. Are there any adjustments to the agenda that anyone would like? Okay, and are there any public comments from anyone? Hearing none, we'll move on to our speaker, who is Bill Frasier from Montpelier, and he is the city manager there, and he's going to tell us about Montpelier's plans for the future.
Sure. Yes, I was told I could do show and tell.
I'll be your go button.
Thanks. I have just a very short presentation just to get us, and it's called CVRPC Presentation Creatively. So while I'm waiting for Bonnie, thank you for having me. It's been a long time since I've been to a full board meeting. My name is Bill Frasier. I'm the city manager in Montpelier for almost 25 years now. I think Bob and I remember being way back then, right? And so we're just going to talk a little bit about, I was asked to talk about kind of some of the economic development activities that we have and plans. I'm just going to buzz through a couple things pretty quickly and then have a chance for conversation, whatever people are interested in talking about. So I wasn't sure exactly your focus, but to the extent that I know what I'm talking about, I'm happy to answer questions. That's a limited scope, I gotta warn you. Why don't I just try to do a few minutes as best I can. It is outlined, and so I'm going to be referring to notes more than I plan to. But our economic development strategy in the last few years was driven largely by a document we called the Innovative Capital. It was our economic development strategic plan. It was completed in 2016 and adopted by the City Council. And so basically my presentation was to walk through the plan and some of the elements of it. Essentially there were, let's see if I can find what I'm talking about now.
Bill, was that the article, was that the document that we're referring to in the newspaper article today?
I don't recall today's newspaper article, but what was that about?
Maybe on Saturdays.
We had a lot of strategic plans going on. I was going to talk about those too. But this was done, like I said, 4 years ago, and basically outlined four key things for us to do. And I'm just trying to, this presentation is aligned. So basically, one was to identify the key sectors in the economy, what makes the economy in Montpelier go. Two was then to consider strategic investments that were targeted towards those types of businesses. Three was to consider transformational projects, and four was to support our ongoing activities. And the key sectors were identified as higher ed and adult learning. We have Vermont College of Fine Arts, we have NECI, we've got Community College of Vermont, some other food processing and advanced manufacturing. We have, Cabot and others in there, and other food processing things. Entrepreneurs, we have a lot of software and IT, local people doing that sort of thing. Finance and insurance, of course, National Life, Vermont Mutual, Union Mutual, and not-for-profit services. Not surprisingly, as a capital seat, state capital, we're home of a lot of nonprofit agencies. Professional business, science, and tech services. As most people know, there's a lot of attorneys, a lot of engineers, a lot of architects, those types of services in Montpelier. And specialty retail. Anyone who goes downtown knows we have sort of the non-mall type specialty retail. And finally, tourism, hospitality, and the arts. So We getting some?
Getting there.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
I'm talking too fast. Let's talk slowly. So actually, these were I didn't have any pictures for these. So those were basically the key sectors, and then obviously the strategies on how do you enhance those and try to seek to have a development plan that looks at those. So the next piece was talking about making strategic investments in infrastructure in our approval process and in other areas. So one of the things we did was to look at our approval processes. We've just recently redone our zoning, and part of that included more administrative approvals, doing sort of changing our processes so that people can get through. We still like to think we have a rigorous process because we want it properly planned, but we're trying to make it more user-friendly so people can understand outcomes better and have more predictable outcomes as they go through the processes. And then our new zoning, of course, was intended to reflect our community values. And then, of course, immediately after we finish our new zoning, we're starting on our new master plan, correct? And so that is mentioned in there. I really hope we can get to this because I had illustrations of some of the investments we have made, and basically it's a combination of public investment for public infrastructure to make our community more interesting and desirable for residents as well as for businesses, and then partnering with private businesses for their investments. And it really is a key portion of this plan. And we're getting there, aren't we? So that's me. This is logo. This is the name of the document, and a pretty picture of the city. So these are the 4 building blocks that I just talked about. So these are the key specs. I just read that to you. So that is basically what we're doing. Thank you, Bonnie. So strategic investments. Most people know Caledonia Spirits, Bar Hill Gin on Berry Street. This is a private sector investment, but the city basically did a mini TIF. This was before we actually had a TIF district approved, but the city did water lines, street improvements, sewer line improvements, some drainage in order to allow them to come in and then basically figured out the payback. So it's about a 10-year payback with their anticipated taxes, water, sewer revenue, and we also did tax stabilization. So this was there was talk about sort of food and service business, agricultural businesses, and for those that are familiar with them, they use all local bees and honey and grains and those kind of things to make their product. So it's even though it's a sort of a fun product, it also is very sustainable in locally. This is our TIF district. So as we think about targeting public investment do we need to talk what TIF is?
Broadly, what is TIF?
Okay, so TIF basically is a tax increment financing district. And in that district, once a district is set, any new tax increment, so a new building, all the new tax money goes into the TIF district into a funding pool, including 75% of the education funds. So you have to go through a very rigorous process to get a TIF district approved, and you can use those funds to create public infrastructure that will help private development happen. So this is our TIF district, and of course you can see the famous Sabin's Pasture is included in there. This is where Caledonia Spirits, as you see, it is not in the TIF district. That's because it was done before it wasn't eligible because we'd already made the deals with them, so we left them out. But one of our real targeted areas is the old granite sheds and everything along Berry Street, is to figure out how those can be reused into more productive reuse to hit some of the goals that we're looking for. And obviously our core downtown is included. So this is a TIF district, has been approved by the state. It is somewhat functional. We've only had one approved project, which is not yet underway. We'll talk about that later. But that's it. So this is more public infrastructure. This is hard to see, but this is an early draft of a downtown master plan that we're working on. So basically intersection improvements at Berry in Maine, State in Maine, School in Maine, and then looking at some bike lane improvements. Some of those, so that is part of the downtown infrastructure vision that we see. We can do the public end and make it easier for private to work. Some of those projects could be done with TIF funding if they were related to a private project that needed it. So that's one way to finance this project. This is our Confluence Park. Just recently got approved as a concept For those of you that don't know where this is basically at the corner of the North Branch, confluence of the North Branch and Winooski Rivers. Shaw's is kind of right over here. And this is the parking lot for the new transit center. And this is where our new bike path that's being finished up is coming through. And the idea is to create a Confluence Park where people can sit and, as you can see, actually get access down to the river eventually for canoeing or playing or whatever they might want to do. Like I said, this design was just approved at the last city council meeting. It's a long way from being funded and built, but it is now on our project list. So it is the kind of thing that is hopefully makes our city a little bit more appealing. This is the bike path under construction going out Berry Street. It runs from Granite Street near the co-op all the way out to Gallison Hill to the Civic Center, the hockey arena out there. It will then be connected, it essentially connects with the bike path that already goes down Stonecutter's Way. The bike path, there's another one under construction. So at the end of the day, we're going to have a bike path that runs all the way from Montpelier Junction to Gallison Hill. And that's what we're completing. So again, that creates an alternate transportation corridor through the city. People can walk on it. In fact, I'm not supposed to call it a bike path. I just remembered, shame. It's supposed to be what is it? Alternate transportation path. I failed. So the transformational projects. This in 2016, this report called for us to have more housing, a hotel conference center, more parking, more advanced manufacturing, and Class A office space. Now, obviously, some of this we think we hit with Caledonia Spirits, but some of the other things. Go ahead. So housing. This is the French block. This has been vacant for 78 years. All these apartments are now 18 apartments above Aubuchon's. After many, many years of neglect, the city, well, actually Downstreet gets all the credit. We just put a little bit of money into it, actually maybe a lot of money. But they really did a great job, and there's a combination of subsidized and market rate housing in there. They're really beautiful. I don't know how many of you got a chance to go to their open house before people moved in, but it's really, they really did a spectacular job. And it's great to see lights on in that building and people coming in and out after, you know, my office is right across the street from there, and after years of just looking at darkness. So it's really bringing a bit of vitality to the downtown. This is our new transit center on the corner of Taylor Street, otherwise known as the One Taylor Street project. This has 30 units of housing, also developed by Downstreet and Housing Vermont, again a mix of subsidized and market rate housing, as well as the transit center. So the GMT buses will be operating in out here, the Greyhound buses will be coming in here. It is scheduled to open later this month. So we're very excited about that. That's been a long time. Actually, that's perfect. This is the schematic of the One Taylor project. So just so people can get a better overview of why we think this is transformational in our downtown. Many of you remember this was an old dirt parking lot. Before that it was a junkyard. Now the transit center is built. The buses come in and circulate around. This is the bike path that already exists. The new path is coming through. This is where the Confluence Park will go. Coming across, coming through to Berry Street. And then the part we're not quite sure of yet is the link from Berry Street to the rec center, which connects to the other bike path. But we think it'll probably be along the street, taking parking out, depending on what happens with other parking discussions. So that leads us to the biggest transformational project so far. Hotel and conference center was listed, as well as parking. The city has partnered, well, the Pasture family who owns Capitol Plaza is proposing to build an 80-room Hampton Inn. The city would be building a 350-space parking garage, of which they would purchase permits for. So the main financing for the garage are permits from the Hampton Inn and the Capitol Plaza, permits from other users, day users as well as monthly permits, and what we call the TIF financing. So the new tax revenue, this building doesn't exist. The new tax revenue from this building will go to pay for this garage. So that's reusing the tax increment financing. So the new increment. You can see how it fits in next to the transit center, and with the bike path, it's coming through around here. This is an old drawing. We've actually got improved. There's going to be a bike lane that comes down through and connects to the bike path, and some improvements. But this is a general idea. So this was intended to help improve the retail segment by creating more parking opportunities, helping more rooms in town, places to be, as we know, Capitol Plaza already has conference facilities, but they obviously they often don't have the rooms. This will improve the number of rooms in town. People often ask, well, isn't parking in cars kind of old-fashioned and old thinking? And from our perspective, we think, number one, cars may change. We see a lot more electric cars. So there's no, I think we all can understand that climate change is a real thing, but cars may change in the future. We certainly live in a rural state where a lot of people, many of you from your communities need to take vehicles if you want to come to Montpelier or Barre. I'm not sure when the transit is going to start running and the trains. That said, we do support rail. This has been built with a rail siding, so if there were ever a commuter rail, this would be a transit center that could use for that. We are certainly supporting microtransit and all the other things. Our feeling is, can you just go back one second? When we talked about bike lanes on street, that's okay, questions, comments? We talk about bike lanes on streets, the more people we can put in here, the more we can open up streets. So if we have to take 14 or 18 parking spaces out on Barre Street to connect the bike lane and widen that sidewalk, we have places to put them. I mean, parking in Montpelier has been challenging for years. We wish we weren't so car-centric, but we are, and it's a reality. Honestly, I would put more structures in and take out more on-street parking for more interesting things, bike lanes, parklets, on-street parks, those kind of things to make it more pedestrian-friendly and put the cars around. Obviously, some people believe in shuttling from a distance. I'm not sure in a cold weather climate in a small community where that successfully worked, but we're open to those ideas. Thank you. So, the last piece of the puzzle was to support our current activities. So this is just an example of some of the things we're doing. As a result of this plan, we created the Montpelier Development Corporation, who's basically we've hired them to implement this plan. This is their work. This is what they're supposed to do. The city pays money to the corporation each year. They hire a director who will be coming on board in November. Looking forward to having her here. And they really help do the lead in terms of, for those of you who have worked with Barre area development or places like that, it's very comparable to that. And they connect with businesses. They help us put some of these deals together. We're hoping we can maybe do something interesting with Sabin's Pasture. They would be taking the lead on that. Montpelier Alive is our downtown organization, has been for a long time. We help fund them. We provide them office space in City Hall, and they support local businesses. They do most of the festivals and activities that you see. They do most of the marketing for downtown, and ads and other types of marketing. TIF, we just talked about the tax and increment financing. That is a relatively new thing for Montpelier. We're hopeful that that will be useful for sort of guided, planned, responsible development. Tax stabilization is, for those that are familiar with it, it's an opportunity to reduce someone's taxes to help them get started. We do have that authorized in the city. We have a policy. It's been used somewhat sparingly over the years. We've tried to make our policy such that it has to hit certain markers in order to qualify. Caledonia Spirits was one that did. We've had a couple others, and it usually means a certain increase in grand list and a certain number of jobs that are coming to the community, and then perhaps other environmental benefits and those kind of things, so they can receive a break. We're currently doing a downtown master plan, ties in with that that sort of design I showed you of the streets, but we're really looking at all of the streets. That is being prompted by, for those of you that go down State Street, there's a bridge called the Rialto Bridge. You don't always think it's a bridge because there's buildings on one side of it, but there is a bridge there. The North Branch River runs underneath it. That bridge is due to be repaired or replaced, sometime. It's on the state's list, 5 to 7 years. That's going to be a big disruption to the center of downtown while that's happening. And our thought was, let's prepare for that, because when that happens, that's the time to do other sidewalk repair, street lights, whatever new designs we want in downtown. Do it while that major disruption is happening, rather than fix the bridge and then come back 2 years later and do sidewalks and all those kinds of things. So we are planning for that now and looking at sort of best uses and hopefully tying that into all of our other things. Montpelier Motion Plan, that is basically our complete streets plan. It deals with mostly biking, walking, how to how to deal with conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles, how to best use the real estate that we have. So some of those ideas are going to be put into the downtown master plan. I forgot one on here. We have a stormwater master plan, which obviously all of our designs are being done so that we're dealing with proper stormwater management. And it does create interesting conflicts because best practices for stormwater say narrower streets, more impervious surface along the side. The bike people want wider streets with more paved shoulders for bike lanes. They're both very laudable goals. How do you sort of manage that so that you're hitting these things properly? Riverfront master plan. This is brand new. We haven't really started this yet, but it's something we are in the process of developing. There's a lot of interest, particularly with the Confluence Park just coming through, Caledonia Spirits showing up on the riverfront. The city recently purchased a property out on Old Country Club Lane, giving us now full control on the bike of that kind of corridor along the river. The bike path's going to be going through there. What can we do with our riverfronts? How can we make them more interesting, prettier, more useful? Those kind of things. Obviously, what can we do for flood prevention? What can we do? Is there a way to look at the dams? Can we remove the dams? What are the best things to do? So we are talking to the Vermont River Conservancy about doing a riverfront. We have a net zero energy plan. The city council set a goal for the city to be net zero by 2030. So here we are coming up on 2020. We've done really well with the city government itself. We're making big strides. Obviously, I think that the council hopes to try to push it further into the community. I don't know if we'll completely get there. It depends on probably the vehicle future. But it's driving most of our decisions of how we go about doing things. And so it ties in with all of the other things. We recently held a transportation forum. I talked about that a little bit, where we had presentations about potential rail or bud car connection between Montpelier and Barrie, on-demand transit, Green Mountain Transit's future plans for buses and those sorts of things, and V-Trans about what their thoughts are in terms of the feasibility of all of this. I think the city supports all of it. We're pushing the parking garage. We'd also like to see all of those other things happen, because the more interesting ways to get people around, the better position we're going to be for the future, and the more choices people will have. I mean, it would be great if you could live in downtown Montpelier and be car-free, because you could use all these other things and take the train to the Amtrak station, or go to the bus station and take the Greyhound to go wherever you're going for longer service. And finally, all of that leads to what we're calling the city plan, the master plan, which eventually will come to all of you. So our planning commission is really at the front end of redoing our city plan, and hoping to take all of this into account. So we're trying to do a lot of this work so that those products can be folded into a comprehensive vision for the city. Here's some of the other activities that we support either directly or indirectly. This is part of what makes Montpelier what it is. We've got the Mountaineers, Lost Nation Theater, Vermont College of Fine Arts, Farmers Market, District Heat, which we did a few years ago, Capital City Concerts, the arts in general. We were just talking about the Hubbard Park Tower, Green Mountain Film Festival, the Bridge. All of these things are what make our city different and special and fun, and many, many more as well. But we can't forget those. We have all these great ideas, but it's also taking charge and connecting with the people that make Montpelier what it is, and the institutions and the events. And so like I said, the city is involved with all of these and many more in some fashion, either financially or directly, or people involved in it. So that is part of our commitment of taking care of the existing things. That's the Women's March, and one of the events that brought lots of people to town. And that's really the outline I have. I'm happy to answer any questions or have darts thrown at me.
Can you talk a little bit about Sabin's Pasture? I know it's been very controversial, and what some of the visions are, and whether the current owner is interested, or where that all stands.
Yeah, Sabin's Pasture. Maybe we should go back to can you go back to the map? Just for those. Sabin's Pasture is this big little open parcel here along Berry Street. It's actually two parcels. 18 acres are owned by the Vermont College of Fine Arts. The rest is owned by a family trust. And for years, there's been a lot of conflict because many of the people, particularly people who live in this neighborhood, but a lot of people have used this as open space. It's been open space, it's privately owned, but it has sort of become a park in many people's minds and uses, and they hold it dear to their heart, even though it's private land. There have been proposals over the year to develop it and have received much backlash from neighbors. So about 10 years ago, Trust for Public Lands basically had a community process. They were going to get involved, and I call it, nobody else does, this is not an official term, I call it the grand bargain. And the grand bargain was basically there would be housing and development on the lower part of the pasture. And there is a line, and I am probably not going to be able to accurately tell you where it is, but there was sort of a point by which people said, yeah, that's okay. You want to be on the street, you want to be near the utilities, that would be a great place. It's a walking distance to downtown, it's a good place for housing, but we'd like to preserve the upper pasture for open space. That's where the nice views are, that's where the flatter land is. Of course, that's the more developable land, but be that as it may. That has received, I think, generally community support in that time. It went by a lot of people. Our zoning has since been changed to reflect that vision. And I think the owner, by and large, understands that that's what's going to fly without much community opposition. And certainly would have, if somebody were to propose something like that, it would have the full blessing, I think, of the city government, that we would get behind it. If somebody were to come in and say, well, you know, I want to develop all over, they would probably not be as warmly received. That said, this parcel is currently being sold by the college, and there is a buyer. I don't know if they've actually closed yet. They are proposing to build a bathhouse, basically a public spa, and housing, and I think a private residence, and keep the top part open. They understand the community vision. The family that owns this, I think, understands that that is a prompt, that plus, you know, again, right across the street from Caledonia Spirits, it's kind of like this is where things are happening. The granite sheds are starting to talk about developing. I think they realize that now is the time for something responsible. So we're in pretty active conversations with them. I don't have anything concrete to report. Trust for Public Lands has come back in. I think in my mind, and this is my mind only, this is not official city position, I would like to see the Trust for Public Lands put together a conservation partnership that perhaps buys out the conservation rights, and the city and some development group partnering, somehow using TIF to purchase this and come up with a development plan. And ideally, again, we need housing. This would be a great place for it, and it would probably be multifamily housing of some sort. So.
Well, given the housing needs, I'm really surprised those apartments stayed empty for so long. Why was that?
The apartments downtown?
Yeah.
The building was in deplorable shape. It was a fire hazard, it was awful. So so the cost of renovating them was really prohibitive. Secondly, prior to Obashan's buying property, it was owned by, Summers Realty was there, but it was called the Dickey family, and you know, business is business. They had purchased the property 75 years before. It was long since paid off. They were getting cash from Summers Hardware and Obashan Hardware and making money. There was no need for them financially to invest. You know, why would they spend the millions of dollars it was going to take to fix it up when they've got positive cash flow? They were out of Boston. So it was just, there was no financial incentive. Obashan's bought the building, and they did not intend to sit on it forever because they purchased it at modern day prices. So we held, our planning department held it kind of an open house and invited housing developers from all over, private and whatever, and took them through. And it was one of these things, as the tour was happening, they all kind of turned to Eileen Peltier from Downstreet and just said, you're the only one that can do this. There's no money in this for the rest of us, just do it privately. And she and her team did it, and they really put together an amazing grant portfolio, and really it was astonishing how they did. But that's why it was a huge amount of work and a huge expense, and it would not pencil out for anyone to do, and you wouldn't have wanted to live there.
Great.
I
Bill, one of the areas when Montpelier reviewed its growth center recently, one of the areas that became part of the growth center again, it had been before, dropped out, was up in the...
Crestview area?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? That would be up in this corner of the picture.
Yeah, I'm trying to, well, it's not even in this picture. I'm
Right.
trying to think how, well,
It would
yeah,
be-
here's downtown. If you go down to Bailey
Up
Avenue,
in-
big field, huge property. I don't know, people may know, it's owned by a guy named Alan Goldman, some of you may know Alan. It's the largest single parcel in the city. And some of the front part of it is really actually closer to downtown than Sabins Pasture is. It may not seem like it as the distance. And when we had originally done our growth center, we'd included a portion of that, thinking that would be a good place for housing or other such development right in the periphery. It got taken out, and no one is really sure why we did it. I think there was some pressure to reduce the size of the growth center and the dimensions of it, but it was taken out, and Mr. Goldman objected. He said, I really want it, I've got some thoughts, and we looked at it and decided that we thought it did qualify, so we, at our most recent re-upping, we proposed to put it back in as it was originally, and they approved it. And there's no more master plan than that, other than we felt it was a good use of.
Water and sewer.
Well, water and sewer does go to that side of it, so that, right, I mean, obviously the whole parcel doesn't have it, but
Right.
that is proximate to,
Which would not
right,
have
that
their
is.
own utilities and
Correct,
electric,
yes.
so they're
Yeah.
already there.
Can I ask about your tax stabilization program and how you use the criteria and whether or not you think it's been successful at attracting business? We have put in that program in my town, and I don't think we've been very successful at getting people interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so here's the thing with tax stabilization. I'm a supporter of it. I think it helps, and it helps you create the environment that you're interested in working with people. There's not really many tools in Vermont to work with businesses other than, I mean, there's tax stabilization and TIF, and that's about it. The state may have a few more, some loans and those kind of things. But when Act 60 went in and the state took over the education property tax, that all became exempted out of tax stabilization. So you're really talking about only the municipal tax. So even if you're a $1 billion property, for us, even if it's a $10,000 tax bill, and you cut it in half, it's $5,000. I mean, $5,000 a year for 10 years, it's nice, but is that really going to make a difference? Is someone going to, if they're building this, making that investment? What I think it has done, and what we've heard from the people that have used it, we've probably had 10 or 12, since that change. Mm-hmm. It was used much more robustly when we could use the education tax. Since then, there's been only a few. So Caledonia Spirits was one, the Cabot, when Cabot came and we renovated, that's new, some of the new buildings out there. The building next to the co-op itself used it, the building next to it that has Vermont State Colleges. So I think it has helped. And what we're told is that it really is used to help with the lease payment for the potential tenant. It helps the developer get a tenant to assure that they can finance the building. Because, it's not going to change their building costs that much. $50,000 or whatever, it comes out to $100,000 over a 10-year period. That's really, right, I know Bob's an engineer, right? That's a rounding error in the cost of construction for the building. But for the tenant, that can make a big difference in their square foot rent. And so it helps get them in the door, helps the building get financed. So is it the be-all and end-all? Nope. Does it help? Yes. But I think you've got to have the other pieces in place too, the adequate water, adequate sewer, the space, the tax rate in general. That's the other thing in Montpelier. Most people know we have a pretty high tax rate. So for us, it's at least an acknowledgement, right? We know we have a high tax. We can help you for 10 years to get started.
Right.
And it's just, again, this is the least we can do.
Right.
But I can't say here with a straight face and say, oh my gosh, with the possible exception of Caledonia Spirits. We worked with them pretty tightly, and they needed everything we could do, and it's, I think, worked out better than we ever imagined. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I'd like to talk about parking.
Yes, please. Everyone's favorite topic.
Well, I understand that parking's always tight in Montpelier, but I will say, as somebody who comes in every day to get my mail from the post office, that I really appreciate that there is parking downtown, and I really appreciate the parking near the Capitol Plaza. In the last year and a half, parking there has been a little challenging because the construction project has needed so much of that space. And which makes me a little nervous about a parking garage going in there, because where am I going to park so I can pick up my mail?
In the garage.
Well,
While it's being built, there was.
while it's being built, and that was my question, is have you made some kind of plans to provide some
Elizabeth Warren has a plan for that.
parking nearby while the construction's occurring? Because
We are, yes and no. So we are acutely aware of that issue, and a lot of it depends on the timing. Different times of year, the demand is different.
yes, I've noticed that.
And so for us, ideally, the project will start sort of in the spring and go through the summer and into the fall, when there's, when it's not winter and it's not legislature, at least mostly. Summer, we think we can manage it pretty well and maybe use some shuttling and that kind of thing. Worst case scenario for us is it started in the fall and went through the whole winter when the demand is highest. But really, that's going to be driven, I'm afraid, by when the lawsuit gets finished. And so that's, and we don't know when that will be. We think we will be successful, but it could be who knows how long.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, does that answer your question? I mean, we really don't have a hard plan, to be frank, but we know that is something we will have to have ready.
Okay, and just as a thank you to the city for having parking available, I don't give the people in the city clerk's office a hard time when I get a parking ticket, because I am grateful that there is parking that I can park in.
Well, thank you, because not everyone feels the same way.
That's what they tell me too.
Yeah, I'm curious, I'm sitting here trying to remember approximately how many parking spots are in that Capitol Plaza parking area now, and you're putting in 350, so it's a net gain of roughly how many?
160.
About 160.
Give or take. Whatever
Yeah.
you find. Yeah. About that.
Yes, I noticed that a lot of the emphasis in the new building is in close proximity to the rivers. I have grave concerns about the state's management of the Marshfield Dam, which I'll email you and give you my concerns. But what about the other dam that's out the other way?
The Middlesex?
Yeah, I'm just curious, in your discussions in terms of building all this out, the adverse rain events, the consensus opinion is that adverse rain events of 1 inch or more are going to be going up exponentially in the next decades. And I'm just wondering if there is going to be a more rigorous oversight of the dams, and if that's been part of the discussion at all.
So we haven't specifically talked about that. I can tell you that we monitor that. I can also tell you that the city's regulations for floodplain building is a foot above the state's regulation as a preventive measure. In fact, you notice even the transit center sits up, the housing is higher than just the bus station itself, and that property is actually pretty much higher. The hotel is actually, in further, and then the garage, people, talk about it being on the river, but in fact, it's actually in a lot in. And Sabin's Pasture, of course, on the other side of the river. Caledonia Squares is right on the river, but they also had to meet all those standards. We, as you probably know, we entered legally, we're a party to the Marshfield Dam.
Yes, no, I know.
All right,
Yes,
so we're
yes.
monitoring that to see
Yes,
whatever.
yes. I'd be happy to fill you in on
Yeah.
some thoughts.
And we've had nothing but good communication with, whenever we've had heavy rain events and flood events, we get, told when the releases are coming so that we can plan and know when we're gonna have peaks and all those kinds of things. But obviously if it fails, it's a whole different ballgame. But,
Okay, great.
I think we're probably in bigger trouble than we're building a hotel if that would happen. But no, we haven't specifically planned for those areas.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Paul.
I have two. One is about, so E, the area E, that's called the pit.
Oh, yes.
That encompasses there's that, this is, I'm sure everyone brings this up, but when you come to parking, there's the giant parking lot, that's state parking that's
Behind the
next to.
Thrush.
Yeah, behind the Thrush. But I see that it's in the TIF district, so how does that work, and why can't the parking garage be there?
There are several reasons why the parking garage can't be there, because that's everyone's favorite place to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah.
One is that we well, you're all government officials, so you understand, nobody wants to believe us, but we did all the traffic work and we found the impact of people crossing State Street and trying to come out onto Court and Elm was much more drastic than here, where they could just come straight on in Taylor or straight on State and come. So we have serious concerns about a major parking structure that we, the city, I'm not sure it would pass our city's own regulations. That said, we still looked at it, and I'm not making the state the bad guy in this, because it's easy to do that. It's a business deal, but they own 66 parking spaces, free and clear. So they're willing to participate with anybody who wants to build a parking garage there, as long as they get 66 free parking spaces. Right? I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Why should they have to pay for something they already own? Well, as soon as you take 66 parking spaces out of the pro forma of any parking structure, unless you're willing to just put tax money in to make it work, it doesn't work financially. And so unless the state partners, and they've not yet bought into the idea that they should help be building this, and maybe they get 200 spaces for their own use, and then there's another 100 or 200 for the city, but even then we've got the traffic issue.
Sure.
The reason that that's in the TIF district is there are two lots, the former mobile station that's vacant right now, and the Thrush lot that are business lots, could be redeveloped. Vermont Mutual owns some land back there. And we have actually had discussions with all of them, including the state, about private development with maybe a parking deck. So it wouldn't be a full garage, but increase the parking there. And also on development, in which case some of the TIF money could be used to help build that parking and have more economic activity there. But people have to do it. Vermont Mutual is kind of, maybe we do, maybe we don't. And fine, that's their investment, not ours. But until people are all in.
Yeah. So part two question is, in after last winter, I'm sure that the infrastructure in Montpelier showed some serious weaknesses that must have been a real hassle. Can you talk about that at all? Is that how do you couldn't possibly be prepared for what happened?
Yeah, so we, well, no. Although it was interesting, we did do some analysis. Some of it's the timing. On a 12-month cycle, we didn't have that many more breaks last year than we normally do. They just were in a concentrated form. And there were two that were, I don't know, calamitous, but the one that kind of closed down downtown and one that closed down the intersection. So they were more dramatic in style than they were just sort of people felt them more than just there's this, one street is out and those kind of things. That said, it was difficult. We know we have really old water lines. We have a 50-year capital improvement plan. We've built into our water rates to improve both the water and sewer. We're doing a major overhaul of our sewer treatment plant now, which we actually think will, because it's going to be able to take food solids and all these other things with it, it's actually going to generate revenue, which we then reinvest. The major thing for us financially is the water treatment plant that we built in 2000. The bond payments for that are about to end, and that's $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And right now that's sucking up most of our bandwidth in our water rates, and so the plan is to reinvest that into the water lines directly, instead of cutting rates, is to take the revenue and use it because we can. So, it's not going to get, it wasn't created overnight, it's not going to get fixed overnight, but it's absolutely way higher on our radar screen. And we are slowly, we're working at it every year.
Were those breaks, so those breaks were not cold weather related?
Well, they were.
They were?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But that's freezing, thaw, ice moving the ground. But as we were talking about ahead of time, we just had a bad one on Route 2 last week, and that was certainly weather related, so we're not sure what caused it, but it happened.
Yeah, on the, excuse me, on the mass transit, talk about running the bud cars or whatever. From just past reading papers and that, what's in the newspaper and that from time to time and stuff. If you start running, has anyone thought, it's nice to think about this, but I have a feeling that if you actually started to run essentially a trolley, or be more in a commuter service, have to be like almost like a trolley service, to make any sense. People in town are going to have a fit because they might be going over like intersection, State Street, Main Street, and it will be potentially noisy unless you electrify the bud cars. And has anyone thought about have a public survey? Everyone who says they want this, and this group knows I've said this before, until the stuff actually starts running, then you got this thing, sitting outside my window, and you got to stop in front of Shores, for instance, and then the people object. So has anyone done a real honest survey about the disruption it could cause and what the nearby people would
No.
think?
So I would say that the notion of using bud cars for a trolley service, which is essentially what it is pretty much at the front end. Mr. Blittersdorf purchased the cars, is seeking to see this happen. The state is doing an assessment of the rail lines to figure out what it would take to bring them to that standard. There's a lot of conflicts to work out between the freight line and the passengers, how those are scheduled. I think what I took from the forum, Bonnie was there, she can disagree with me if she wants, but was that a lot of the operational issues haven't been thought through, that it's at a concept level. Frankly, he wants you all to run it. No, Green Mountain Transit, not the original plan. Sorry, that's right. That's right, it wasn't you guys. He thinks that some sort of transit authority should be planning all of these issues. I do think that, your point about the intersections is well taken. And when we have big rails that cross, they do tie the intersections. These are, would be single cars, and my sense was he was thinking about a stop, maybe out by the Amtrak station, maybe at our transit center, maybe out by Grossman's and Berlin and Barry. I don't think he's talking about stopping in the middle of intersections and there's just one car along. So that piece of it, but certainly the noise is definitely a factor. I don't think they're talking about running them late at night, but nonetheless, it's sure. But cars are noisy too. I live on a busy road and I hear them zipping by all night long. So.
Anyone else?
The development activity in Montpelier was pretty quiet for a while. And now it seems like there is an incredible amount of activity. Other than the efforts of yourself and city staff, what do you credit that development surge to?
It was definitely city staff, yeah.
I figured it was you.
Yeah, it's all me, actually, yeah, thanks. No, I think a lot of things, the economy's gotten better. I think opportunities are presenting themselves. I do think that, it wasn't anything that the city staff did, but I think the strategic plan, the messaging from the city government and creating, there were messages sent that the city is interested in it. I think for the longest time, the city had a reputation as not wanting this and very difficult to do business with. And so some of the changes, whether it was the permitting changes or zoning changes, things like tax stabilization, they're not, any one of them in and of themselves isn't necessarily great, but when people start seeing, say, hey, you can pull this off. And honestly, I think Caledonia Spirits had a lot to do with that. We worked really hard to put that together, and they've been our best salespersons. They're telling everyone, we love working with Montpelier, they were great, come to us, and I think other people said, wow, if you can get that done, why can't we do something? But that said, we can't get a hotel and a parking garage built, so I don't know how that's going to help our reputation. That has nothing to do with city government, but if people see that kind of obstructionism, which I probably shouldn't say, then that may change their attitude.
But a lot of people feel like the time is right now to invest in the city, and so we're trying to be positioned to do it responsibly, not be overrun with it, and look at the options for the future, and make it a better place for all of you to visit.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for your talk, and I'm really grateful that the slide presentation actually came up.
Yeah, me too. There's no way I would have pulled that out without it. So.
I'm trying to practice more so we have it ready next time. And thank you very much for coming. It's great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Marcella.
Yes. Okay, next on the agenda.
Good luck.
Reviewing- Is everybody free? We're talking about the municipal plan approval for the follow-up on the provisional approval of the Middlesex Town Plan. I think it was supposed to be Claire, but
But Claire's not here tonight.
Claire's not here
She
tonight.
is at an alternate meeting tonight.
okay.
So then, once before, the commission did a provisional plan approval where you said if nothing changes or nothing substantive changes, this plan is approved. And then the municipality went through the adoption process. But we realized that we never really closed the gap with the board to say, has anything changed? What happened in the adoption process? So Claire put together this memo to let you know, well, it went to the town, but to let you know what happened. So the town of Middlesex adopted the plan. There were no substantive changes. That closes the loop, and we officially have a plan that is approved. So it's the difference between a provisional approval and an approval. And part of what she's going to do is work with the town plan review committee and maybe develop that into a more formal process, because this was essentially a staff review. It was easy, nothing had changed. But what if there were changes? Who determines what substantive is, staff or the board? So part of the reason we do the provisional approvals is that in Middlesex's case, they wanted to apply for a municipal planning grant, which is due the end of this month essentially. And sometimes board meetings don't coincide with town votes. So there's some process steps in there I think will work out with town plan review and then full board approval. But letting you know that's coming along as well.
Any questions or comments?
We don't need to vote on anything. No.
We don't, no. Okay. All right, thanks very much. Next on page 3 is a memo about a possible committee appointment for vacancy on the Regional Plan Committee. So the Regional Plan Committee is going to start working again on the regional plan. And we originally had 5 members, and Kirby Keaton has stepped down and Marcella has taken his place. We sent out, I guess people got this last week, so you were sort of notified that we're looking for interest in the Regional Plan Committee. We have had one person that may be interested, but if anyone else is interested, we're interested in appointing someone at some point. You know, so we're just hearing from you or anyone that might want to be on the Regional Plan Committee. It's, we meet once a month. We may not be meeting once a month at the beginning because we have to wait for staff to write the plan and then we review it. So it's going to be probably a couple of years of a process. So if anyone's interested, let me know, and hopefully we can get an appointment, if not tonight, at the next meeting. So you have my email. Okay?
I'm sure folks will batter down your door.
They usually do.
It's a good committee to be on.
Yeah.
It really is the heart of what the Regional Planning Commission does, that regional plan.
Yes, the region. All right, next we are doing municipal dues on page 4 of your packet.
But do you want to? Oh, memos from the
Yeah,
executive
what
committee,
is, yeah,
remember?
please do.
Okay. So municipal dues, we're kind of jump-starting something you asked to be included in the bylaws. Traditionally, it has been, the executive committee has been assigned the task of setting the municipal dues assessment rate every year. And when you discussed bylaw changes earlier, the commissioners voted, you didn't vote. The commissioners indicated they would like the board to set that rate. So executive committee talked about it and said, we really don't need to wait for a bylaw change to do that. We can bring a dues approval to the board at any time. So the goal here, this is something the board hasn't seen in a while, or ever, as far as I know. What the executive committee did is provide a recommendation to approve the fiscal year 21 dues assessment. So this would be in your next year's town budget at a rate of $1.25 per capita per person. And it was recommending switching what we use as the base. Traditionally, CVRPC used the US Census numbers. We know Vermont's population is decreasing in most communities, and over a 10-year period, that kind of throws the town ratios out of whack. And a few times our actual formula says or estimates. The Vermont Department of Health provides annual estimates. They take the census numbers and the CDC, I think, the National Center for Health Statistics actually does the calculations, and they take the actual census numbers from 2010 and they adjust them for births and deaths in the state, as well as domestic and international migration. The idea is that by the 2020 census, the estimates by municipality will be closer to reality than they would be if we used the 2010 census numbers. Those numbers are now 7, 8, 9 years old. But it will be 2022 until the 2020 census numbers are released. So you have the census, population numbers aren't released for 2 years afterwards while they work to verify it. So executive is recommending using the estimates to bring the population numbers more in alignment with what we expect things to be in 2020. And then there are a couple of tables in here. One just is a quick and dirty, what does that mean from a population change perspective? And how would that reflect for each municipality in the increase or decrease of their dues? And then the other part the executive committee always asks of staff is on page 7. How does CVRPC compare to other regional commissions? And so the regional planning commissions across the state, we update this every once in a while, somewhere between 2 and 5 years, depending on whose board asks for it most recently. I've highlighted in a darker black box where central Vermont is, and this is organized by the per capita equivalent. So not all RPCs use a per capita, but it's an easy comparison, population divided by the funds raised. So what this chart does is give you a sense of where do we stand in population. We're the second highest region, population-based, only Chittenden County is higher. What is the data source? We would be, in the upcoming year, one of 2 regional commissions who are using estimates. More are looking at it, but right now only Addison County does. How much each commission raises with their dues? We're somewhere in the mid-range. The number of municipalities each RPC serves, because as you can see it varies widely. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, they have 50-member municipalities, and the Lamoille and Southern Windsor RPCs serve 10. So again, we're somewhere in that mid-range. And then we look at, as staff, dues as a percentage of your total revenue. What that means for us is what's the leveraging power of those dues? we use those dues in a variety of ways, but how much service do municipalities get based on those base dues they provide? And so among the commissions, it's somewhere between 2 and 6%. For Central Vermont, it's 5%. So we're towards the higher end of service provided. We always talk about what's your calculation method, because we look at each other and say, should we simplify? As you can see, some of these are more complicated, some are less complicated. And then again, the per capita equivalent, we're a little bit below average there. The 125 for fiscal year 21 theoretically would move us up by 1, but that assumes no one else changes their due structure, and a couple of commissions have said they're in discussion to do that. So from a comparison basis, that's what page 7 is about.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the dues assessment? Bob has a question.
Yeah, what have been the adjustments in dues in the past few years?
In the past few years, we've done a dues through fiscal year 16, 17, and 18, we remained steady. We increased for 19 by 5%, 20 by 3%. I might have the 3% wrong, 2 or 3%, and then 2.4%. And so the recommendation for 21 was 5%, or 5 cents, I'm sorry, I'm saying percent, I meant cent. So the recommendation was 5 cents, but adjust the population number, so it's not as dramatic of an increase as it would be if it were 5 cents on the census numbers. Does that make sense? We're playing a little bit of catch-up.
Because you were messing up cents and percent. I still didn't get, we made adjustments last year, right?
We made an adjustment of 2.4%. I'm trying to remember the number. The number, I think, was a 3-cent increase. 1 year was 5 cents, 1 year was 3 cents. CVRPC's history had been every once in a while we do a 5-cent increase. In talking to some of the municipalities, they indicated they would rather have a steady increase rather than a jump. And then in looking at how our dues were fitting in the overall budget and some other items, staff was recommending to executive committee that we do a little catch-up before we start a regular. So we look at it in the perspective of what is the budget as a whole. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just a quick question, and then when you said do a little bit of catch-up, does this do the catch-up? And would you anticipate in the future for it to be smaller incremental?
It does not do the catch-up. I think what we do is look every year and try and maintain us at about 5%. But as the state and federal funds decrease, and as importantly, the matches are growing when we pursue those grants for services regionally or to municipalities, the match numbers are changing a little bit out there. That's where we're looking to leverage what we can. So I don't have a projected trend line or a goal. We have a balance every year.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? If not, we are looking for a
I'll
motion.
move to approve the proposed, recommended rate increase.
Thank you. Bob, motion.
Second.
Second. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? Motion carried. All right. Next up is the FY20 work plan and budget. Bonnie's going to explain it to us.
I always start with, what is CVRPC here to do? And we have a mission. The way I describe it to people is that generally what we do is we leverage the power of people working together. A lot of our work involves working with committees, with work groups, helping other people figure out what their common theme, their common idea is, and then put together a program, a project, a service that they can carry through to implementation. Our on-paper mission, which is pretty important, is to assist municipalities in providing effective local government and to work cooperatively with them to address regional issues. It's about providing services to your municipalities and identifying those common struggles or common opportunities among them and helping you talk through, work on, focus on those regional issues. We do this through generally 4 program areas, so we're talking work plan here. We do local project assistance, so we're helping the town of Cabot do a trails master plan. We do it through regional planning, which we'll walk through a couple of more examples, but it's not just the regional plan, it's how we help municipalities work together. We provide training and education to either individual municipal staff, municipal boards, or the community as a whole. And then we work and influence state and federal policy development by either bringing local perspectives into those state and federal policies or helping in order to help state and federal policy, to the extent possible, better reflect what you experience on the ground. So from a local perspective, what are we doing this year? And that is the Northfield Stormwater Construction Project, a $500,000 construction grant, that construction project that will be completed by the end of this month. The local projects, we're assisting a number of towns with town plan updates, either in their entirety or in pieces and parts, as they need help. We're doing some local energy planning, responding to Act 174, so we're working with 5 communities to assist them in developing an enhanced energy plan for their town plan. Trail master planning, working in both Cabot and Northfield. Working more and more with communities on emerald ash borer response plans. Those trees in the right-of-way, when they die, they're going to fall, and they're going to get more expensive to clean up. So many of our municipalities are focusing on what they can do to mitigate that cost or those damages in the future. And in the upcoming year, we're expecting to work in partnership with the Winooski Natural Resource Conservation District and offer between 7 and 10 municipalities free inventories. And then CVRPC staff will help with developing the management plan and doing the mapping. So by doing that partnership, we're leveraging resources. The Conservation District has college interns who work for them for free every summer, and they were willing to dedicate a portion of that time to inventories. Grants and Aid is a municipal road water quality construction project. Most of your municipalities participate. We are doing a plethora of stormwater designs and projects installations. I think Pam has 7 individual projects going at this time. We are currently working with East Montpelier, Williamstown, Moortown, and Plainfield on local hazard mitigation plans, and we'll be working with Calais and Montpelier in the upcoming year. Ashley's out there, and Ashlyn is out there doing culvert and erosion inventories, and Dan and Ashlyn are writing capital plans for municipalities to consider, and then the municipalities can adopt them, change them, but you provide the staffing to get that done. And then we're working with a number of communities on village center designation this year. Zach's been doing that, and he's going gangbusters as municipalities request assistance. When we talk about regional planning, Claire and Zach, and I think Nick, our VISTA member, are working with the Montpelier Housing Task Force on a regional housing summit for this winter. We are working on regional energy plan implementation, and a lot of that work is working with local energy committees. We just had a forum in Montpelier, a roundtable where we were hoping for 15 to 20 people and got 37, and it was a very dynamic discussion focused on local transportation options, and we've gotten a lot of committees now knocking on our doors saying, Here's what you can do with us regionally so that we can do our work locally. Plan Central Vermont, Claire's going to talk to the Regional Plan Committee this month, I believe, so the November or December board agenda, I would expect, might have something on just updating you on how we'll make progress on that. The Local Emergency Planning Committee, we're District 5, we support their efforts. So these are a variety of intermunicipal district. We provide bookkeeping services to the Wrightsville Beach Recreation District at the request of the 4-member municipalities. We're working with 8 municipalities on a Stevens Branch Transportation Resilience Study, which will help them get a good sense of if they've got a transportation resource, bridge, culvert, and it has a problem with resiliency, water. What kinds of solutions might help, and what is the gross cost of that? And I categorize that by saying, is it $5,000, $50,000, or $500,000? It might be a little more detailed than that, but it's kind of the early start for municipalities to get a sense of what they could do and what it might cost. And then Dan is working on a project with folks related to public transit where we're doing inclusive planning, inviting those transit riders and potential riders to help support how transit serves them. So there are education programs. There will likely be a participant from this region on GMT's ADA, Americans with Disability Act Advisory Council. So how do we start including people who ride transit in the actual planning and implementation of the system and making those decisions? Training and education, we have quite a bit coming in the upcoming years. I believe we're doing 3 planning and zoning roundtables focused at housing, childcare, and a variety of other topics. The regional energy roundtables, we'll be doing 4. One of those was done earlier this month on the 2nd, and 3 more are to come. We do regular road foreman roundtables, usually 2 to 3 a year. Claire and Zach are involved in a project at a state level called Zoning for Great Neighborhoods. So it focuses on how to make your communities more housing friendly through your zoning bylaws and really looking at some national models and then translating them down to what that might mean on the ground in Vermont. What can you do as easy steps? What can you do as mid-level? And what can you do if you really want to go at it and provide ideas there? And then one of the others is emergency management director roundtables. We'll be doing at least 2 of those, helping the EMDs for the new ones understand what their job is, but they've also asked for an opportunity to get together and talk about some of the challenges they face when they try and do their work. Policy development, some of the things I see in the upcoming year. Right now, we're involved in a clean water service provider implementation of that legislation, and the board will hear about that at some time in the future. I just briefed the executive committee on that. In the next year, CVRPC will have to decide if it would like to be a clean water service provider. Changes to Act 250, we're not quite done with that conversation. Coming soon to a theater near you, or a meeting. The Emergency Relief Assistance Fund is known as ERAF, and that is if your community implements different activities like adopting road and code standards, having a local hazard mitigation plan, having a local emergency management plan, being part of the National Flood Insurance Program, and potentially adopting river corridor bylaws. A municipality, the state will pay a greater share of your local share during federal disasters. You get an automatic 7.5% state contribution. By adopting certain things, you can move that up to 17.5% state out of a 25% match. So the state is looking at making changes to that program this year, and we just received a survey at a staff level to provide some feedback. So that affects how that policy ends up at your municipal doorstep. The local emergency planning committees, the State Emergency Response Commission has a proposal to consolidate those They have different alternatives. I'm going to a meeting tomorrow night down in Pittsburgh where they're planning to talk more about those. We could end up with solutions of one statewide LEPC. LEPCs defined by RPC boundaries with the expectation that all RPCs will serve them, which is not what is happening now, and anything in between in a consolidation model. So we're engaged in that discussion with the LEPC as well as the State Emergency Response Commission. And then the Agency of Commerce would like to propose some changes to Chapter 117, which is the Municipal and Regional Planning and Development Act, the IGR town plans and zoning, to help foster housing opportunities. That discussion has just started. They put some proposals on our table as RPCs were giving them feedback. I'm hoping we can talk to some of our committees about that as well before the legislative session starts. So RPCs provide a role in trying to help make these state and federal policy items work for municipalities. From a budget perspective, some things I'd like you to know. In the RPC's budget, contracts and agreements drive 97% of the ability of budget, which drives our abilities to assist towns. So we are not a nonprofit seeking foundation funds or a municipality with taxing authority. We seek contracts and agreements to meet specific needs. The town dues leverage our ability to provide the assistance and ensure our continuity of operations. And I apologize, Amy, I keep looking at you because you're the, this is a little harder. So,
That's
knowledge is our business, and I'll show you in the budget what I mean by that. And reducing overhead costs is an ongoing activity at the commission, and we balance that with the commission's other goals. So an example is, for a long time, we had a staff member who did our bookkeeping. For various reasons, we decided to contract that service out for a while to an accounting firm. That actually raised our cost. It also strengthened our financial systems. To have someone align us and bring us fully into an accounting program. So that was a case where we monitor those costs, but sometimes you actually, you do better by paying more. When we talk about our revenues, where we get our money from, we have some core planning sources. Every year, the legislature appropriates money into the, just remember, municipal and regional.
Fund?
Property transfer tax, thank you. And those property transfer tax, based on a legislative formula, is divided among a lot of groups, in addition to funding everything. There's a set-aside, and that set-aside is divided up among regional planning commissions, the Municipal Planning Grant Program, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. So that's the legislative appropriation. The RPC funds come through the Agency of Commerce, and there's a formula for dividing that up among all the RPCs. We've had an ongoing relationship with the Agency of Transportation for a transportation planning initiative since 1991. That's a solid arrangement where over time VTrans has become, appreciates the fact that RPCs provide a lot of data gathering, those bridge and culvert assessments. We help them fulfill their federal requirement to consult with local municipalities and local communities about state investments in transportation. The Emergency Management Performance Grant funds things like local hazard mitigation plans. Those Emergency Management Director roundtables are assistance to municipalities for local emergency management plans and a lot of other cross-collaboration work on emergency management. And that's funded by the Vermont Emergency Management. Sorry, it changed and I realized I didn't do that. It's now Vermont Emergency Management again. And then more recently, we have an ongoing relationship with the Agency of Natural Resources for clean water money to support municipal education and tactical basin planning assistance to the state to engage municipalities in that. One significant change this year is the stormwater design and implementation. As I mentioned, we have a $500,000 construction project, but we also have a lot of design work that ranges between $8,000 and $25,000 per project. So when you add that up, that's a big budget driver for this year. From a revenue basis, something you need to think about is that this 5% is our municipal dues. I've talked about how that leverages the rest of the budget. The way an RPC is funded, this is the portion of our budget that is that legislative allocation, 19%. This is other annual contracts, so the transportation contract, the emergency management grant, and the clean water funds make up about 26% of our budget. And this 50% are project-specific contracts. Every 1 to 3 years, we replace this 50% of our budget. So it might be a forest integrity special grant, it might be a special stormwater construction or design grant, it might be the Cabot Trails planning, but they are specific projects where we constantly ask municipalities, what are your needs? Is this a grant we can help you write, or is it a grant you want us to write and manage for you? What that means is that we're highly dependent on state and federal grants, state and federal priorities, and the relations we build there. That, well, a third of our budget, but this year it's 50% of our budget, is dependent on projects that have a duration of 1 to 3 years. And then as grant and state and federal priorities shift, right now that shift is saying, we're not planning as much, we've been planning for 10 years, now let's implement. This 50% of our budget is shifting towards implementing rather than planning. And that is the nature of RPC work. You shift with those priorities and you help municipalities find the activities that meet those shifts. Areas of change, things that are happening in the world. State and federal governments are focusing on contracting efficiency, and they prefer a single entity for contracting. An example of that is the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation has invested about $30,000 per regional commission to help implement regional energy plans in areas that meet VEIC's mission, electrical efficiency and conservation. They prefer a single point. They don't want to administer 11 grants, so they contracted with the Bennington Regional Commission, which contracted with all the other RPCs and manages us. That makes the agency's life simpler, and as RPCs, we're getting better and better at developing relationships to improve those efficiencies. And then many public and private grant programs now prefer applications involving multiple partners. Everybody wants everybody to work together. So the knowledge of our staff and the knowledge of those consultants is what drives our services and why municipalities come to us. Professional services is more accounting, legal, things like that. But that is 80% of our budget. I didn't walk you through the specifics of the budget. That was included in your packet. If you have particular questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Oh, wait,
Yep.
one question, go ahead.
One question on your point. I've noticed on the lease for the rent
Yes.
for the office, notice had to be given by 9/29/19. Did we renew or?
We did not do either. We asked the landlord for an extension due to some extenuating circumstances. We have some proposals for other spaces. The landlords are now providing their proposal to us. When they provide that proposal, we have 30 days to make a decision. And I expect that'll come in late October or November. They're getting some cost estimates. We asked them to do a bit of space renovation so that you have a larger conference room and a door on that conference room in the office. Do some work in the kitchen, potentially adding a sink. And there was one other piece. That was more of an optional piece. If you look at the Rite Aid building that we're in and the big window that is my office, that window hasn't been replaced in a while. There is plastic on it, you know how you blow it with your air dryer to, but even then, it's very cold in the summer and very warm in the winter. It needs a little efficiency work. So they're costing that out to see if that's a potential. But the conference room and the kitchen, they definitely committed to. They realized that conference room space in Montpelier is at a premium. If you look for that space, other than the city of Montpelier, most of the spaces will charge you $200. And so they realized that even if we left, they could rent the conference room. So it's in their business interest to make that investment.
And one quick thing, I noticed on the website, they were saying with a new service provider. Who's that going to be?
The new service.
On the website, it said from update and modernize and then a new service provider.
We haven't begun that process yet. We haven't put a request for proposal on the street. But we are having more and more difficulty with our website because it's an old platform. And if you look at our website, it's not very fresh, modern, and new. So we're going to combine the new service provider with a website refresh.
Sure. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stupid question, and it's probably, everybody knows this, but me. So we're not, we're not a not-for-profit, or we are?
Yes and yes. We are now, as of a few years ago, officially a political subdivision of the state of Vermont in terms of being able to apply for grants and other pieces. CVRPC in particular applied for 501c3 status many years ago. And so CVRPC is a 501c3. We need to notify the IRS that we are now officially a political subdivision of the state. That will probably change the 501c3. So we were enabled by the legislature and formed by the municipalities, but what are we? We are not anything like anybody else. We're something between a nonprofit and government.
Is there some advantage to possibly clarifying that for accounting purposes or not, or it's better to be ambiguous?
It was why we asked the legislature as RPCs to put in statute that we're political subdivisions of the state. Most of our funding comes from a state agency, even if it's a contract versus a grant. And the federal grants we apply for, they like it clarified that you're a political subdivision. That does not mean we are the state, and we are not a municipality. There's no taxing authority there. But we're quantified as a political subdivision.
Does that mean
We're less nebulous than we used to.
Does that mean we could take donations?
We can take donations. We always could. And they were always tax deductible. It's just clearer now.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about our anticipated role with the state's water quality program and where you see the regional planning commissions and Central Vermont RPC fitting in as far as the implementation of the state's program, as far as money to projects flowing through to municipalities and so on?
Are you referring to the clean water service provider or
Right.
more globally? Okay.
Well, yeah, clean water service provider in particular, because I know it's a bit of a moving target, but where do you see that?
Act 76, which was about clean water implementation, set up something called Clean Water Service Providers and Clean Water Councils. The service provider, the way I characterize it, is a grant administrator. The state will, by virtue of a rule, designate a clean water service provider for every all the 12 watersheds. We can express interest in becoming that, as can a variety of other groups, including private businesses. What that service provider does is become the recipient of a prorated share of clean water funds to implement projects that are not covered by other permitting program. Not the 3-acre stormwater rule, not wastewater permits. It's about river buffers, to some degree, rain gardens, the kinds of things that aren't currently under a permit program, to implement those projects. As a part of that, the state will give the clean water service provider a pollution reduction allocation, meet these targets, and here's money to do it. The clean water service provider, working with the Clean Water Council, establishes priorities, how you're going to prioritize projects, and anyone can propose a project, from a municipality to a nonprofit to the RPC. And so we have to decide as an RPC whether we want to become that grant program administrator and run the Clean Water Council. That council is not our current QUAC. It has a statutory makeup that has broader representation and is not nearly as municipally focused. 1 or 2 municipal representatives for the entire Winooski watershed. If we chose to go in that direction, we wouldn't necessarily apply to be our portion of the Winooski watershed. It would be the entire, including Chittenden County. Most of Chittenden County is covered by permits, so it's not as difficult as you might think. And we do have a lot of partners like the Winooski Conservation District and the Friends of the Winooski who already provide project services in that area as well. Did that?
Yeah, that's very helpful. It just seems like a big program moving forward that I'm sure will have some involvement, correct?
We do. I participated in a meeting last week where Vermont DEC was asking for, they've been meeting with different groups. They asked for RPC input on a number of topics related to what clean water service providers could and should do and how they might be set up when the agency does its rulemaking process. They need to do that. They need to designate clean water service providers by November or December of next year. And then they will set the pollution allocations and what the clean water service providers will actually do. First you become a provider, then you figure out what a provider does. That's how the legislation is currently set up. There was some discussion of asking the legislature to perhaps flip that process. And then I think everyone realized clean water is not a can of worms you want to open. So, clean water legislation. So we have to make the decision on a little bit of a grain of faith. And I think the discussion over the next year with the agencies and our partners will help us become more comfortable or become less comfortable with being that provider.
So once you decide whether or not to become a provider, is there a renewal process or are you stuck with it?
I'm going to step back and say, we decide whether we want to hold up our hand.
Right.
The Agency of Natural Resources decides which hand to pick. So if 3 folks in the Winooski Basin hold up their hand, it might not be us who gets picked to do it. No one's talked about renewal process. You're it until the agency decides you haven't met your pollution allocation and never will, or you pull your hand down. There's not actually a process for withdrawing yet, which is what we've suggested they incorporate into the rule.
Okay.
The sausage is only half done.
If that far.
Lee has a question.
Will there be a regulatory aspect of that? Because a lot of the pollution comes from construction activities.
So construction activities are already regulated in some ways through stormwater permits, so that would not be included under this. This provider is about providing the Agency of Natural Resources with capacity to manage grants to areas that are not covered by permits.
Okay, so you wouldn't be rolling the permit activity into that then?
No, no, that is not us, that's them. We would be, as the clean water service provider, responsible for the maintenance and operations for the projects we fund through the design life of the project. Like we did with the Northfield, or will shortly do with the Northfield project, we will have an operations and maintenance agreement with the owner, if we move in this direction, with the owner of the project to provide that, and will outline what they have to do to show us it's being operated and maintained. So yearly reporting, some sort of inspection, it depends on what it is, as yet to be defined.
Any sense of staffing requirements for this?
Not until we have a sense of, there's a prorating by watershed based on your pollution allocation. So it could be $100,000 or $2 million. My guess is it would be something like a half a position.
Okay.
And so when staff said, how are we gonna get this done? And I said, you have to think of this as an opportunity. We're now talking internally about, can we do this? What would it mean? What would it change? We have a technical science-based person, Pam, who does our natural resources program. She's got skill in that. And many of our staff manage grants, and Dan takes on the grants and aid program. It's more of a program-based. So you have to think about the skill here is really grants management and establishing a system. And that is probably the skill we would look for. That would be an opportunity to rearrange some of what else we do and move most of grant administration to that staff member. But we don't know enough
My
yet.
reaction was more than a half a staff member.
It depends on the dollar amount, right?
And it may ramp up over time, right?
It may ramp
That
up
may be the
or ramp
challenge.
down over time as we succeed. Assuming it's us, I'm going
Cleaned
to
all
come
the
back and
water.
say that again. There's a decision to be made at some point in the future whether we should apply.
Yeah, there's a question I was going to ask. Is the commission going to vote on this?
I don't know, I will ask you that. I think somewhat it depends on how this unfolds, how much time we have to actually make a decision. And I was definitely keeping executive committee in the loop and starting that process to ramp up. If it's something you feel like the commission should vote on, that's your prerogative.
Well, we don't know what it looks like yet.
Right.
I think once we know what it looks like, then that decision might be made.
Right, and we'll talk about it more over the next year as we know more. Right now, it's at the early sausage stage.
Interesting. Any other questions on Bonnie's presentation? Very nice, thank you very much, Bonnie. I think we are at approval of minutes, and they're on page 27.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Bob makes a motion to approve the minutes. We have a second.
Second.
Peter seconds. Any questions, comments, corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining?
I can't remember, I wasn't at the last meeting, can I vote to approve or just to abstain?
You can
Yes,
vote.
you can vote.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we have approved the minutes. Thank you. And next is reports at page 30.
One of the additions to the reports, I was going to talk to you about the CERC and the LCC consolidation. I think you got what you needed earlier. There is a working community, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston has a working communities challenge grant out there right now. Berry City is the only potential applicant for a region based on some economic factors. Part of what I'm doing is calling a lot of partners and trying to get partners on the same page, and there are quite a few of us out there doing that. One of the things that the grant is focused at systems change. Pick a challenge in your community, form a team, and tell the Federal Reserve Bank how you're going to create systems change by working together. I didn't know what the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston was. I think that's what I heard, Federal Reserve. They're actually a lot of what they do is research, economic policy research. And they did some work and with what makes communities effective, what makes communities succeed, and what their research showed for cities and now rural areas is that what makes them succeed is people working together to address the challenges they have. So they put together a Working Cities Challenge program, ran that in, this is the Federal Reserve Bank of New England, so they ran that with a few states. Now they want to take that model and bring it to Vermont as a rural model. And they are doing that. So they're going to award roughly three planning grants of $15,000 to help the awardees explore how they can work together around a concept. And then $300,000, probably 6 planning grants, and then three communities that get those planning grants would be awarded $300,000 to implement the system change they designed. So there are a lot of folks who would like to pursue the Working Communities Grant in and around Barre. The role of many of the regional providers and the municipalities is to shepherd the squirrels in a same direction at a same challenge, whatever that group defines the challenge as. Some of what I've heard, there's a group working on workforce development, how to better align our workforce development efforts. Some of them have been, I've heard, addressing transportation barriers. Some have been focused at the Central Vermont Medical Center when they did their community health needs assessment, which you'll hear more about next month. They're trying to align stakeholders around the idea of improving health outcomes. There's a group talking about housing. So where in there is the system change that we need to create? So our role as a regional commission is to have people work together. So I don't know whether we'll be a part of that grant. We might not actually be a part of the grant, just a part of fostering a collective effort. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Bonnie or the staff in the reports?
In terms of, I'm a bit of a dumb bunny, I didn't quite follow, is Barry working on this now, or, oh, I see, okay, so.
Yes, they're getting, a lot of people are talking to Barry,
Got it.
and Barry is talking to people. It's by the end of this month, by
And is
November 1.
Within Barry or outside communities also, or just within Barry?
Right now, it's within Barry,
Got it.
and then local and regional service providers. By November 1, they have to be able to identify who the partners are, and in 50 words or less, describe what system change they want to make happen. And then by December 1, they have to have a more complete application that talks more about how they're going to get to that system change. What is their planning process?
Anyone else? Would you like to leave early? Oh. Is that a yes, Don? John's made a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Lee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, all abstaining. Good night, and thank you for coming.
You could miss it if you were.